continuing our premolar adventure. We've already looked at the maxillary first premolar. Today we're moving on to the maxillary second premolar. You're going to see there's a lot of similarities between these teeth. We're going to be highlighting the key differences. There are two maxillary second premolars, the right and the left, and those are numbered number 4 and number 13 using the universal numbering system. The maxillary second premolar is located distal to the maxillary first premolar. It's very similar to the maxillary first premolar with 2 cusps. Differences, there's only 1 root, and it's smaller. The function of the maxillary second premolar is the same as the first: to chew and grind food, support the cheeks, and maintain the vertical dimension of the face. The maxillary second premolar is going to form from 4 lobes: 3 buccal, 1 lingual. The maxillary second premolar erupts at ages 10 to 12 years old, and the root completes about 3 years later at 12 to 14 years old. The initial sign of calcification is 2 to 2.5 years old, which I also just remember as 1 to 2 years old. Let's look at the maxillary second premolar from the facial. Once again, there's going to be a lot of similarities to the maxillary first premolar, but the crown is smaller than the maxillary first premolar, and the cusp isn't as sharp. The shape of the crown, trapezoid with the shorter base at the cervix and the longer base at the occlusal. There's a cusp tip, making it almost a pentagon shape. The maxillary second premolar, like the first, has 2 cusps. But from the facial, we can only see one of them because this buccal cusp is larger and taller than the lingual cusp. The distal cusp slope is larger than the mesial cusp slope. For the mesial outline is curved over the contact and slightly concave cervical to it. The contact on the mesial is located in the middle 1/3. The distal outline is more broadly curved over the contact and straight towards the cervical. That distal contact is more cervical than the mesial contact, but still in that middle 1/3. Like the maxillary first premolar, the maxillary second premolar has a buccal ridge that's going to run from the cusp tip to the cervix. This buccal ridge is similar to that labial ridge of the canine and is formed from the middle developmental lobe. There are depressions to either side, but not as deep as the depressions of the maxillary first premolar. The maxillary second premolar only has 1 root, unlike the maxillary first that had 2. Now let's flip this tooth over and look at it from the lingual. From the lingual view, we can now see both of the cusps of the maxillary second premolar. And that's because the lingual cusp is shorter and narrower than the buccal cusp. But the difference in cusp height is not as extreme as it was for the maxillary first premolar. These are a lot closer to each other in height. The cusp tip of the lingual cusp is mesial to the center. The lingual surface is smooth and quite spheroidal, though there can be a visible lingual ridge sometimes. This tooth is going to taper lingually, meaning the mesial distal dimensions of the buccal are wider than the mesial distal dimensions of the lingual. Now let's check out those proximal views. This is the mesial, this is the distal. Lots of similarities with the maxillary first premolar, but also a couple of differences. The shape of the crown is trapezoid with the larger base at the cervix, smaller base at the occlusal. There are 2 cusps. The buccal is taller, but it is nearly the same height as the lingual. There isn't as big of a difference as there was in the maxillary first premolar. The cusp tips are confined to the outline of the root trunk. There is no tilt to the crown like the mandibular premolars will have. The buccal outline is convex with the height of contour in the cervical 1/3. The lingual outline is convex with the height of contour in the middle 1/3. The mesial marginal ridge and distal marginal ridge are horizontal and part of the occlusal plane. The mesial marginal ridge is more occlusal and the distal marginal ridge is more cervical. The CEJ, or cervical line, overall is less than the anteriors, but the mesial is still more curved than the distal. The maxillary second premolar has 1 root. It is wider buccal lingually than mesial distally, and there are shallow root depressions on both the mesial and the distal, but the distal is more pronounced. Some notes for the mesial. There's some anatomy that was on the maxillary first premolar that is not on the maxillary second premolar. There is no depression on the crown cervical to the contact, aka no mesial developmental depression, and there is no mesial marginal developmental groove crossing over that mesial marginal ridge. Let's look at our maxillary second premolar from the occlusal. The shape is going to be oval, wider buccolingually than mesial distally. Occlusal anatomy of the maxillary second premolar is going to be more symmetrical and more rounded than the maxillary first premolar. There's going to be a tapering towards the lingual so that the buccal is wider mesial distally than the lingual is, but this tapering is not as extreme as it was with the maxillary first premolar. We'll be able to see our two cusps from this occlusal view. Buccal cusp is bigger than the smaller lingual cusp, which is offset to the mesial. Now let's look at our ridges. Once again, do not panic. We're going to go through these together, starting with our marginal ridges. Those are going to be the mesial outline and the distal outline. Our mesial marginal ridge at the mesial and our distal marginal ridge at the distal. And these are going to be positioned horizontally, unlike the anterior teeth. Now we're going to look at our ridges around our cusps. Each cusp is shaped like a pyramid with 4 ridges around it, almost like a compass, north, south, east, west, but instead we got buccal, distal, mesial, lingual. So let's look at that buccal cusp first. We need to know 4 ridges, and these are going to be the same as our maxillary first premolar was. For our buccal cusp, going towards the mesial is our mesial buccal cusp bridge, towards the distal is our distal buccal cusp bridge, towards the buccal is our buccal cusp bridge of our buccal cusp, and towards the lingual is our lingual cusp bridge of our buccal cusp. But we're going to prefer our alternative names for the buccal and lingual cusp bridges. For the buccal cusp bridge, just the buccal ridge. We saw that from the facial. For the lingual cusp bridge, we prefer to call that our buccal triangular ridge, because that's the triangular ridge coming from the buccal cusp. And a triangular ridge is a ridge coming from our cusp tip to our central groove. Let's move on to the lingual cusp. Once again, our cusp is a pyramid or a compass. We have 4 ridges we got to name. Towards the mesial is the mesial lingual cusp bridge. Towards the distal is the distal lingual cusp bridge. Towards the buccal is the buccal cusp bridge of the lingual cusp. And towards the lingual is the lingual cusp bridge of our lingual cusp. We have preferred alternative names for those buccal and lingual cusp bridges though. Towards the lingual, that lingual cusp bridge is just the lingual ridge, which we might have seen from the lingual. That buccal cusp bridge is our lingual triangular ridge. And now that we have 2 triangular ridges meeting each other, that's a transverse ridge. Now you know all the ridges, 4 per cusp. Alternative names are those preferred names, and the marginal ridges. Now let's look at the grooves from the occlusal. Like the maxillary first premolar, there's going to be a central groove. It runs between our 2 cusps, but the central groove of our maxillary second premolar is shorter and more irregular than the maxillary first premolar. There's going to be multiple secondary grooves that we don't need to know the names of, but this makes the tooth look wrinkly or raisin-like. There will be pits where groups of grooves meet each other. For the maxillary second premolar, there's a pit at either side of the central groove, the mesial pit and the distal pit. The maxillary second premolar also has 2 fossa, the mesial triangular fossa and the distal triangular fossa. They're triangular in shape, like the name indicates. They're located on either side of the central groove. The base of their triangle shape is along the marginal ridges, and the sides of the triangle follow the grooves towards the mesial and distal pits. The maxillary second premolar has 1 root, and that 1 root has 1 canal. And that's everything you need to know about the maxillary second premolar. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next video on the mandibular first premolar. Till then, check out this playlist of dental anatomy videos, and happy studying. Bye!